You're listening in on an animated discussion about Batman the Animated Series with two experts in their fields. I'm Joshua Unruh, superhero scholar.
And I'm Caleb Masters, your friendly neighborhood film critic extraordinaire. And today's topic is the Season 1 episode, Heart of Ice.
It is the moment that you listeners have been waiting for. It is the episode that Caleb and I have alluded to probably 6 times in the tiny number of episodes we've recorded up till now.
At least once per episode.
At least once per episode. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Heart of Ice. And joining us to discuss Heart of Ice is wonderful friend of the show, wonderful friend of us personally, and comics podcaster extraordinaire, Vinton Bane. Vinton, welcome to an animated discussion.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited.
Before we dive into Heart of Ice, let's make the listeners wait just a little bit longer.
All
But
right.
please tell us about your comic book podcasts.
Yeah, so I do comic book podcasts. It's a community-built podcast that had interviews with lots of different creators and segments on the show, including Joshua
from
Unruh,
me.
some really interesting stuff on the Golden Age, and then some really interesting histories on Robins, actually.
That's right. I still owe you one.
The show has been kind of changing format slightly because I'm not really good with doing interviews, and I just don't have as much time as I used to. So it's going through some changes. I've been trying to do with like some mini episodes, things like that.
Will I still be able to send you my
Yes,
Robin segment?
I will
Okay.
do segments when I get them, but they will not be in every episode anymore.
Fair enough.
But there's a whole back catalog with lots of interviews with lots of cool creators on there as well. But yeah, you can check out those shows. Read Brave is graphocast.com, graphocast.com. You can also find those anywhere you can get your podcasts, including YouTube.
Probably where you're listening to this one right
Probably.
now. Probably.
And if you'd like to talk to me about comics, I'm on Twitter at FleshEater, and that's pretty much all I do on there is just talk to everybody about comics all day long, every day.
It's good. It's a lot of fun.
It's a lot of fun.
Pay attention.
It's a lot of fun.
Vinton, let's talk about the title card, because really most shows don't do them.
That's
But
right.
Batman the Animated Series does them incredibly well until today.
Yeah, well,
Joshua,
it's-
I thought you loved all the title cards. All
I
the
like
time.
the idea of title cards on Batman the Animated Series. I feel like this one's a little lazy.
I will be honest that I almost thought there wasn't a title card when I went to rewatch this. 'Cause like, oh wait, where's the title card? And then I was like, oh yeah, this one does the motion title card where it's just there's nothing else going on.
Yeah, to bring it out, to describe it, you get the title on a black background and snow falling.
Yep.
I don't know if it's the only animated title card, but
Yeah, it's one of few,
It's
if
one of a
not the
tiny
only.
handful, yeah. And I don't hate it. I just think it's kind of lazy, and I feel like there was probably a better one to be had involving, I don't know, a ballerina in a snow
That
globe.
they show right after they transition.
Exactly.
It kind of, in a weird sort of way, feels like that first image they transitioned to was supposed to be the title card. Now I'll
That's
say,
the one I would pitch.
Now I will say, I disagree with you specifically for that reason, because on the surface were the titles there, yes, lame title card, but this is also the first one out of the batch we've been watching where there's actually that transition directly into the episode. Usually
That's true.
There's usually a break. And I thought, oh, that's a cool effect. It actually just took us right into his opening, Mr. Freeze.
I like the
monologue.
motion.
I
on
like
it.
that. I like the transition. I feel like if you could have done the snow globe and animated the snow in the snow globe and left 2 red, baleful eyes glowing in the background, which, by the way, at the time even, I wouldn't have recognized as Mr. Freeze eyes necessarily. That is kind of new for this show, and then has since then become like a big deal for
Right.
him, because before this,
He was a nobody.
I will say, before we dive into the episode, this is the first Mr. Freeze origin ever.
Right.
This is it. He was on Batman 66. No origin. He'd been in the comic books before. No origin. So they go from no origin to one that will break your damn heart.
Yeah, that's what this show does right. This episode specifically, it takes this hokey, gimmicky villain that his only thing is just to freeze things, make puns sometimes, and gives him an actual tragic backstory. Makes him one of, I think, literature's most tragic villains in a lot of ways. Like in most
Yeah, no,
medias.
I'd agree.
Yeah.
I'd agree. It's the same thing. We've been talking about Two-Face. You get the same thing in With the Two-Face two-parter, we learn to care about this person. We don't really get to learn to care about Victor Freeze much, but we get it.
They reverse it, though. Instead of in this one, we see the terrifying monster first, and then we grow sympathetic when we find his backstory.
What made him a monster?
Versus Two-Face, where it's the other way around.
You mentioned that they redesigned Freeze as well somewhat. They gave him a new look here. Do you know who actually gave him that look? Who was the character designer on the show for this episode?
I don't.
It's Mike Mignola, Hellboy creator, was actually the one who gave him this look. He was the one who designed
that makes the
Freeze's
most sense I've ever heard.
He worked on the show for a couple other people too that I'm not sure what those characters were, but I know that he specifically created Freeze.
Because the style of the show is so distinctive, it does not actually come out the other way looking very Mignola.
No, yeah.
But now that you tell me that, like the glowing lantern eyes,
right.
Even
the
taking
suit itself.
Exactly. I was about to say,
Very
even
sci-fi.
turning this kind of steampunk sci-fi, right? Like before that was even a thing.
It's very Art Deco. This whole episode's hyper Art Deco, I would say.
Yes, it's
definitely
steampunk by
him.
way of Art Deco.
Yes.
He's definitely creating a character in his style in the Batman animated series house style.
Yes.
So
yes.
he's doing his own things, but keeping the Batman house
I'm not sure I
style
ever
for
would
the
have guessed
series.
that, but it makes total sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Vinton, one thing I'm really glad you mentioned too was that this character had been known for like bad puns, and like here's the thing, all of that stuff that he's been known for is still here.
It's here.
Yeah.
But they twist it and write it and perform it in such a way that it just
it's
takes on a whole new
menacing
life.
instead of anything else.
Yeah, the gimmicks are one of the biggest parts of what keeps Batman villains coming back, even when they're not very good. And listen, even Joker, like in his first appearance, not spectacular in the first appearance in the comics. It's just like one idea.
Those old comics are just a different thing.
But it's enough of a hook to bring them back until they sort of accrete enough stuff, or they get a creative team like this who's like, "Oh, I've got an idea for this guy." And we're going to break your damn heart with it.
And not only did they give him his backstory, they actually gave him his name, which is stuck around in the comics. He was never known as Victor Freeze before this. He actually had a completely different name in the comics. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head.
They only say it once, and it totally doesn't matter.
And it has nothing to do with freezing or anything. Victor Freeze, obviously a cheesy name, but again, it works here in the series.
Yeah,
Well,
I'm into
and
it.
that's the thing, like they did it so well and effectively that this replaces any pre-existing version of that character.
Yeah, we don't need to talk about it.
Yeah.
It's actually, even in terms of Batman 66, which I come to with a very specific set of expectations, I don't like the Mr. Freeze episodes because I'm like, I don't care about you. Like, I just don't care about you. To that point, in contrast to Two-Face, where it's very personal to Bruce Wayne, so we have an entire episode where we get to know Bruce and, well, we've seen them in other episodes, but then we have one that's kind of like get to know Harvey Dent. We come into this episode so late in the game that Batman has literally already solved the mystery.
Right.
Like at the beginning, there's no question. He doesn't know who Mr. Freeze is, but he knows what he's doing and who he's doing it to.
Right.
And we just skip right to that because we need to spend this story real estate with setting up Mr. Freeze and then revealing Victor Freeze.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's the thing. This really is, it's kind of like we've talked about in past episodes. This is a Mr. Freeze show.
Yeah.
Guest starring Batman.
It's
in a
true.
way,
It
in a sort of
absolutely
way.
is. Yeah.
Which is what, again, this is what we get to see yet another angle of Batman. We see a compassionate Batman here, which is a lot different than what we've seen in other episodes. They're able to use the foil of Mr. Freeze to showcase a different Batman in a different light than what we'd seen before. So it works for both characters in a really powerful way, I think.
Yeah. This characterization of Freeze works so well. They based his character off of Boris Karloff and Vincent Price. If it's not completely obvious,
Yes.
that's just exactly where they pulled him out from. The voice acting is so spot on. Even the effect on the voice, or I don't think it was just a voice actor doing that, but I'm pretty sure there's some kind of effect laid over.
There's multiple effects.
But it's really cool sounding.
By happenstance, I just happened to be listening to a voice actors podcast, the Talking Tunes with Rob Paulson, and they were, for some reason, I pulled up Mark Hamill's episode. It was on my iTunes list. I was listening, and they talked about this. And apparently, the actor who they had cast as Mr. Freeze, Michael Ansara, they had to like do multiple takes to make him more and more stoic. Like they said, it's going to be as deadpan as
drain the emotion.
So
Drain the emotion.
too much.
So I wonder, I'd be very curious now, because there's one place where his voice is pretty obviously doctored. That's at the end when he has his helmet broken and he's just very raspy because the hot air is possibly killing him. And that gets a real obvious kind of like crackle laid over it, which I think is really cool. I'm now very curious how much of the super deadpan Mr. Freeze is just acting, because you can tell a real difference between that and when he's Victor Freeze in the security tape. I mean, did they do anything to hollow it out? Because he is talking into a glass dome. So I wouldn't blame them if they did a little something to hollow it out.
Sure.
But it really just deadens it out.
Speaking of the voice acting, this is actually, you have Mark Hamill featured in this episode. This is his first appearance on the show in production order because he hadn't yet been cast as the
That's
Joker,
right.
which you'll probably talk about that when it comes back up. But originally, Tim Curry was cast as the Joker,
Right.
Yes.
Right.
but never got his chance because he ended up getting sick. So he had to back out of the project. And Mark Hamill, when he was on for this role, was like, just give me something. I want to be a villain. Can you make me a villain? If Joker opens up, someone, give me someone. And they gave him Joker.
That's fantastic.
And he was actually kind of intimidated. I don't know. We might talk about that in a later episode, actually. But like, he was really intimidated when he actually got offered the role of the Joker.
Yeah,
sure.
Because again, Ferris Boyle is just like a crooked white collar.
Yeah, it's easy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's low-hanging fruit, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Which, while we're talking, we've mentioned the names multiple times now. There's your first pun of the show. It's Freeze versus Boyle.
Yeah. Ooh.
So, I had not caught that. I did think that Boyle's name was a play on words, but I actually thought it was in terms of like the pustule that needs to be popped because he's so repugnant.
Yes, he is.
Like, he's just... Listen, the wage slaves, and, just putting forth this really positive public relations face and so different behind. I actually looked at that in terms of him instead of in terms of Mr. Freeze. But
Freeze versus Boyle.
fair enough.
That's a good point.
I mean,
Good catch.
They do a really good job with him here because Freeze is the villain, but not really because Boyle's the
Because
villain.
Boyle's the villain.
The vengeance plot in this episode is just so good because Freeze is almost justified in his actions, and Batman is kind of on his side in a lot of ways.
He really is. I mean, and the audience is on his side
yeah,
too. You're like,
it's-
yeah, go ahead, get that. Get
Yeah,
that Boyle.
it's big business versus the people they step on.
I can't help but draw some comparisons with Two-Face. But this is another one of those Batman arguments that I like to have settled in the fiction. This idea that Batman is some kind of relentless, vengeance-driven person. He's not. Justice and vengeance are different. And you see in this episode what that looks like.
Right. We see.
And it's
Mr.
textual.
Mr.
He says
Freeze.
out loud,
Yeah.
not vengeance, justice.
Mr. Freeze is the epitome of revenge and vengeance driven. So we see a guy who is purely driven by vengeance in this episode. It demonstrates the difference between here's a man out on a personal vendetta and here's justice served. Victor Freeze, I get what you're doing, man, and I understand your feelings, but this is not the way to bring Boyle down.
At the point that he's prepared to murder everyone in the building.
Which Batman even brings up.
Like, really?
Yep,
Yeah.
that's not justice, right?
Right.
And we should mention the writing on this is done so well. This actually was a rush job. They had really bad deadlines on this, ended up getting pushed a lot further. They ended up bringing in a ton of different animators, which just shows how tight-knit they were.
Yeah.
They could do that, and it still flows really well. And it was also the first time that Bruce Timm and Paul Dini, as writer and director team, worked together on the show. This was early in the production, so this is the first time they actually worked together, and they became obviously the famous duo for the show. But they did such a good job with this. They ended up winning a Emmy Award for outstanding writing as an animated program for it.
That's fantastic.
It's almost like Orson Welles doing Citizen Kane's first movie or something, right? Like, how do you make arguably one of the best episodes of the show on your first one? It's crazy. One thing I wanted to mention too, just to pick up on the differences between Batman and Mr. Freeze. I think there's a really great. It's obviously like in the text. Whenever Freeze's crony trips up, right? Like,
oh yeah,
and Mr. Freeze just like leave him. He's incompetent. He failed. So leave him.
Right.
Perhaps you would like to join his fate.
Right.
Nope, we're gonna go.
Yeah.
But then as these escapes, Batman is the one that stops, and you can see the sorrow in his eyes. Like, I really want to chase Freeze, but justice is to save this guy.
Yeah.
Right.
And Alfred makes that textual too. Like,
Yes.
Alfred specifically calls out, you're having a lot of compassion for this person that would have left you to die. And I really like that we make compassion textual because I think compassion is the huge thing that separates vengeance from justice.
Yeah, I agree.
Most
Yeah.
definitely.
Speaking of that, because of the way that he's healed, and we just mentioned Mark Hamill, this episode actually has two different Empire Strikes Back references.
Oh, that's true.
Which is the healing water tube.
Right, the Bacta tank.
Yeah, exactly. And then Batman hanging upside down in the ice cavern.
Wow.
Where did he pull
Nice.
out the lightsaber out of his utility belt?
Right. I don't know if they did that because Mark Hamill was on. They were just like, let's have some fun or what.
It's so wild that you tell me what a rush job this episode was, because I was actually going to call out how good and fluid and dynamic the animation is.
Right. Yeah.
The cars, the Batmobile swerving around on ice.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit before we started recording about the close-ups on the like Frankenstein laboratory stuff that healed the henchman. We're going to spend a whole 3 to 5 seconds on this Jacob's ladder, that dynamo. They're so dynamically animated.
And we talked a little bit before just about how the animation company, without being asked, went in and airbrushed every single cell that had Frieza's helmet in it to give it that frosted look, which they didn't get paid for. They weren't asked to do, but they just thought they'd go above and beyond and do that. And it makes such a beautiful effect because originally they were just going to have the outline.
It's just the outline, which would have been fine. We would never have talked about it. But they go in and do that. And now, if I understand it properly, TV or video, I guess, is like 32 frames per second, something like that.
24 frames per second.
Is it 24? Okay, good. Nailed it, film guy. Thank you. So you got 24 frames per second, which means every single second he's on screen, you're airbrushing 24 individual animation
every
cells.
second for 20-something minutes. Well, I mean,
Yeah, he's in it a
lot.
lot. Yeah, because it's a Mr. Free show that happens to have Batman in it.
Speaking of weird technology in this, I want to
There's
start
more than a little.
I want to. I mean, you could talk about. God, there's so many different things we could talk about. Well, let's talk about Mr. Freeze's technology. Okay, this pushes the line of like what kind of sci-fi can it also exist in this universe. We have a freeze gun, and my favorite was when he pulled up the giant freeze gun that he used to like ice off the building at the end of the episode.
I love freeze gun.
And in the same universe, they're driving these like long 1920s style vehicles and using old school guns. Like this is completely in its own little fantastical sci-fi.
Right. It's completely like an alternate reality because there's the technology that's way back. There's black and white televisions, but then also Bruce Wayne has supercomputers and all sorts of things.
This is not the episode where I have it written all in caps and underlined in my notes, but I've done it more than once. When is Gotham? When? I just can't figure it out.
It's in the 3000s, 1950s.
Exactly. Nailed it.
It would also be remiss if we didn't mention that really awesome technology that Boyle has invested in that allows him to videotape this whole lab sequence from multiple angles. And apparently,
it's some kind of virtual reality camera that captures everything and then cinematically puts it together.
Listen, when he comes in and insists to Victor Freeze that he's $3 million in debt because of Freeze's stuff, I was like, no, dude, that's the cameras you put in this lab.
That's you hiring Spielberg to film your projects.
Like, Spielberg, I need, just for this top secret tape that no one's ever going to see, can you turn all this footage into a masterpiece? And don't forget to leave the Nora.
More Dutch angles. More Dutch angles.
More Dutch angles on my video cams. Yeah. There's only a couple of places in this otherwise fantastic episode where you go, whoops. Do a flashback, for God's sake.
As well as I would say, like, this episode works thematically and the dialogue is fantastic. That it's little things like that make you go, oh, okay, I can see why this is a rush job because they're like, we got to get this together quick. And there's some logical leaps.
It also bothers me that every time Batman uses his supercomputer, it's just a camera shutter just hitting over and over again as he's using the computer.
Okay.
I'm like, why? Why is there a camera
I have a
taking
theory
pictures?
about that. That does not make it any better. So you have this weird mix of technologies, right? That is what card-using computers, the computers that would compute with cards.
I could see that.
That's the sound they make.
Photographer, I just thought of like cameras.
No, totally.
Totally. That makes sense. Batman just being like, here are the things that were stolen. If I put them like this, it's a death ray, but it's missing one key ingredient.
Okay, again, I just assumed that that's part of how we missed him doing the detective work.
You see these four separate things? Watch when I do this. Death ray.
Death ray. Didn't expect that, did you?
You couldn't just tell me it was a death ray?
I didn't spend $1 billion on this computer to tell you it was a death ray.
Look at my computer. It's very cool.
Listen, I'm saying we get to see him do detective things later in the episode, which is a thing I always call out, because for so long you don't get any detective Batman. So I'm prepared to assume that there's just this sort of missing 22 minutes where he actually solves the crime and also makes his computer figure out the thing.
I also really just like the way that they set up this GothCorp company. The first thing that they show it is this. They mention that the Boyle's a humanitarium, and they say it's a people company as they're chasing off the children that they're trying to play.
Right?
Listen,
so perfect.
It has been telegraphed from minute one. This is some pretty masterful stuff, especially for a rush job or whatever. That absolutely, you have security guards yelling and chasing children from GothCorp, the people company.
As the reporter says, the people company.
It's spectacular.
And Boyle is winning the humanitarian award.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, when Bruce is sitting in the office and Boyle goes off on his speech, like, you can't let the slave wage control you. You got to shut people down. And Bruce is just like, what is happening?
Can we talk about the Wayne shade? because the Wayne shade is in full effect.
It's
in that
good,
episode,
but
or that
what's
scene.
better than like the Wayne shade for me, because it doesn't happen just yet, is as he's giving his speech, he gets cut off by the buzzer, which sounds like a game show buzzer going
Right.
like
Wrong.
But then his secretary says the humanitarian board is here to talk to you.
So
Yeah.
perfect. The irony is flawless. And
It's
And
great.
then he tells Bruce, "I'm winning the humanitarian award," and Bruce goes, "I feel ill."
I feel ill. And it's almost Batman voice. Like it's in between.
Well,
yeah.
Conrad, I think, is still getting his Batman voice in this episode.
Yeah.
He's not quite there. You can see a clear difference between this episode, the way he talks, and later episodes, because he's still finding that groove.
Right. This is, I think, again, this is the third episode aired. Production. It's very early in the production of the show.
But I do really like that Batman does get a cold. It really shows his humanity. He's fine. We all have to go to work with colds all the time.
Right.
Here, Batman has to. And I love when Alfred's like, "I can't believe you don't have a compartment in your utility belt for tissue," which, if this was 66 Batman, he would have had a compartment for tissue.
And to be honest, do you want to be busting muggers and ruining your image as Batman by like having a bunch of snot hanging out of your nose?
Hey man, all I know is chicken soup is the only cure for a good cold. And you know what? Joshua's rolling his eyes over here, and it's a great bit of humor that is injected into an otherwise really heavy episode.
It's
And
very heavy. It's also a super serious moment.
Yeah, very serious.
And we picked the serious back up with the videotape and the not vengeance justice. So it's just, it bothers me, guys.
I do wonder, like, I'm sure that when they were looking at the script, they were like, "Oh man, this is great. Oh, this is so dark and heavy, and this is like our 5th episode we're producing. Maybe we should inject some sort of levity in here, or something that's going to like lighten the mood, even if it's just for a moment."
Yeah, we got to get all that levity out of our system before we get to It's Never Too Late. It's going to be really sad, you guys.
This is heavy, but no. So I think using something like that, and I don't feel like it feels uncharacteristic of the episode or of the tone they set. It's just lighter. It's a lighter.
You have to like the line when Alfred first hands him the soup and he's like, "Knockout gas," and he's like, "No, chicken soup."
that bit I like.
Because
That bit I like.
Alfred to a T right there. Alfred knows he's just going to think this is like knockout gas.
It's just we've watched them give these super corny pun lines to Mr. Freeze and him nail them. I mean, nail them. And then we beat him with chicken soup. Even beating him by superheating the glass so it breaks. Like, I get that. But, the chicken
I like
soup.
it. I feel like it's a
don't know.
resourceful story.
I like it too, especially in the same episode where he says, "Think of it, Batman, to never again walk on a summer's day with a hot wind in your face and a warm hand to hold. Oh yes, I'd kill for that." It's rough stuff.
And that is directly after he has delivered a line like, "It would move me to tears if I still had tears to shed." I mean, it's so melodramatic, but because he gives it no inflection whatsoever.
Yeah, even that
makes it
opening
work.
line that "Revenge is a dish best served cold," when he just opens his red eyes and you see it, you're too like terrified of this character to be worried about how cheesy that line is.
No, you should be scared. The snow is beautiful, isn't it? Clean, uncompromising, and cold, like the swift hand of vengeance. I'm afraid of you, dude.
Yeah. Someone said that to me, I'm scared. And
you've got a
that
freeze
voice.
gun. We're in a lot of trouble.
And I just, the character who claims to have no emotion at all is the most deeply emotional character of all.
Yeah.
And to move us.
That opening line is super poetic.
It's so poetic. When the closing line, I mean, just as moving, he says, "I've failed you. I wish there was another way to say it, and I cannot. I can only beg you to forgive and pray that you can hear me somehow, someplace. Someplace your warm hand waits for mine." I'm not tearing up right now.
No, it's real strong. We give Mr. Freeze a heart, because here's the other thing. When we'll talk more about this as he comes back over and over, but the more he comes back, the more he gives a lie to his own insistence that he lacks all emotion.
And that's the beautiful irony
He's
of it.
shutting it off. It is definitely frozen within him, but every now and then it thaws a little.
Well, the thing is, his lack of emotion is so deeply driven by his actual emotions. Like, yes, he shuts himself off.
I don't want to feel
and
this thing.
Yeah. It's so critical to understanding what makes that character so tragic. I just think the way they wrote him is really masterful.
And then you have the line when he confronts Boyle and he says, "In my nightmares, I see my Nora behind the glass begging to me with frozen eyes. How I've longed to see that look frozen on you." Which is right after he uses the fire hydrant to get up to the appropriate level on the building with his freeze gun, which is the coolest thing.
I don't think that's how ice works, and I don't give a damn.
Yeah, it's so cool. He just walks up and kicks the thing and right
it's
up
a
to
thing
it.
I really appreciate about Mr. Freeze. He's a scientist. He has a plan. And when Batman stops the first plan, he just looks around and is like, okay, I'll make this work. I got a fire hydrant. I got a freeze gun. And I got a guy up there that needs killing. Mr. Freeze is a little bit of a stretch as far as an opposite number villain, but in some ways, he's very much the opposite number villain to Batman. Vengeance over justice.
Right.
And the similarities really sell that when it's a methodical approach to a problem.
Well, and again, especially as the longer this entire animated universe goes on, it's made very known that Batman is the stoic one. It's really critical in the very early days to understand that, no, he is compassionate.
Sure, he doesn't look it next to Superman, but what do you want? Look at that guy. I always do like to call out when Batman does actual detective things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because, Dark Knight Detective.
Yeah, he costumes up
In this
one.
case, it's disguise more than anything else, which I file under detective things because of Sherlock Holmes. So for better or worse, disguising yourself.
Totally.
But also, being a security guard's got to be like one of the top 5 worst jobs in Gotham City.
And the way that security guard dances off
Yeah.
as
Right?
he's like, no, you can go ahead. You can get out of here. And he's like, oh, yay. And he just
No
skips out.
no red shirt for me tonight. I'm going to the party.
It's so good.
It's really great. I have a metatextual bit of business that I would like to bring up because I bet Vinton, as a big Batman guy, really appreciates this. Let's notice what company is responsible for the creation of Mr. Freeze.
GothCorp.
Let's notice what company isn't responsible.
Wayne Corp.
That's the one. I forget the exact episode, but I will be watching for it. When Robin specifically makes the joke, another supervillain brought to you by the fine technologies of Wayne Enterprises. And I like the joke, but I kind of hate that he can make the joke.
Yeah.
Because if there's a company in Gotham that is being run ethically and shouldn't result in constant supervillains, it's Wayne Enterprises.
Right. You don't want a Tony Stark Bruce Wayne and make it to where he has this business that's doing horrible things while he's trying to be a superhero.
Exactly.
It really undermines, when you frame it like that, it really undermines all the setup they did by not making Wayne Corp the bad guy throughout the early season to later make a joke about it. Because, viewers are, one of two things are going to happen. You're going to see that and you're going to be irritated because it's lazy. Or two, they're going to buy it and just assume he is Tony Stark. Oh, yeah, he's a playboy, got a really crappily run company, which is not the case. We see that in the early episodes. It's definitely not the case.
And here in the first season, they make a huge effort for that. We will see Daggett, a completely different evil company, show up in Clayface's origin. Let's nod at the fact that Wayne Enterprises knows what they're doing.
Yeah, and we do see, of course, that Batman and his Bruce Wayne alter ego is played as the playboy dumb guy who's he's like, yeah, I'm aloof and I don't care. But you can see that he does still carry those morals and he wouldn't be running a corrupt company. Like when he walks in and here to Mr. Boyle and he makes those jokes and he's upset. He's like, humanitarian, what?
When Wayne Enterprises screws up or when corruption at Wayne Enterprises is brought up, that needs to be the plot. Right? Because Batman's going to go sort that out. And so it's nice here at the early stages to have evil industrialists, not well-meaning inept industrialists who are also Batman.
Yeah. Which, speaking of the way that Bruce Wayne acts, and Batman picks it up at the very end, I love that last line of Batman's "Good night, humanitarian."
Oh, yeah.
It's
so great.
The Wayne shade returns.
The shade is too much to handle. It is really nice. I think we've already mentioned it, though, when I think you read the line, when Freeze ends up in the prison at the end and you have that touching scene. It's a great way to end it. And then you see Batman watching him. Like, Batman actually cares about what happens. This guy knows that there was an injustice done here and sees him weeping over this snow globe, which they were kind enough to let him keep in his prison cell, even though he could shank somebody with it.
But I think you raised a great point, Vinton. One thing I've noticed about Mr. Freeze is that Batman empathizes with this guy a great deal throughout future episodes and the Sub-Zero movie like this is, and even into Batman Beyond. Really.
Yes,
like
yes.
He empathizes deeply with with Victor Freeze. I think in this early batch of episodes, another big takeaway is that it really does show Batman empathizing with Two-Face, Mr. Freeze, and we even see with the mob boss.
With Stromwell, there's a lot of opportunity for Batman to see himself in these people.
Right. And I think it's, again, another really critical point that I really feel like more recent versions of Batman have just completely overlooked. Like he's borderline the Punisher sometimes, and I love that this show goes out of its way to showcase. No, he is a hero. Yes, he even cares about the bad guy.
That's true.
Guys, this has been a great conversation on Heart of Ice. This movie is still 10 out of 10, 11 out of 10. Joshua, I mean, this is
9.5 out of 10. I don't like the title card, and I don't like chicken soup. I'm going to be at 9.6.
So, Vinton, special guest, comic books expert. If people like this episode, what would you recommend? Something else, either a comic book or TV show, movie?
Yeah. Well, I have a movie, and then I have two of them because there's one I just couldn't say, and then one that's kind of like a real one.
Okay.
The one I couldn't.
I like this approach.
I just couldn't avoid saying was a YouTube series that was turned into a movie during the writer's strike. Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog by
sure.
Whedon and a bunch of other famous people that got together when they just wanted to do something when they couldn't because the writer's strike was going on, which just has to be brought up because it is also a very tragic story about a villain and involves a freeze ray.
If you like the philosophical conversation of where's too far and when is the villain so sympathetic that he may or may not be a villain, Dr. Horrible is for you.
The other one I think more is closely like, if you like this episode, you might like this movie, would be Raimi's Spider-Man 2 film where Doc Ock becomes a diabolical villain after a failed experiment, kills his wife, and leaves him neurologically fused to his mechanical tentacles, turning him into that villain character. And it's a tragic story, kind of.
Well, while we're talking about things that make really empathize villains and rewrite their backstory to be way more fascinating and philosophically conflicting, Smallville with Lex Luthor and Superman. I'm just going to throw this out there. And maybe this is a little more morally ambiguous in a Superman story than you'd prefer, but I think it does a very morally ambiguous take on it because it's complex, right? But I would say, Joshua, and as much as I want an ideal Superman story, I think, and especially in the Becoming Superman, it's okay to showcase Clark Kent's flaws.
Yeah.
To watch Smallville.
Sympathy for the devil in Smallville is huge.
So outside of that Smallville recommendation, just throw Romeo and Juliet, classic Shakespeare. A little bit of that. I think that one's a good one because it speaks to the tragedy of love and why people do ridiculous things for love that they would never do otherwise, and how that actually can be destructive.
Yeah, it's one of those classic stories that most tragedies can trace back some root to.
I'm going to go for a bit of low-hanging fruit here and say that if you enjoy stories that involve freezing cold weather, tanks of medicinal water, and people being frozen while hanging upside down, not to mention somewhat nuanced villainy, I'm going to suggest you watch Empire Strikes Back.
I mean, I thought you were going to go with the J.J. Abrams Star Trek reboot with the icy planet thing, but totally took me a surprise there.
Sure, that one too. So I think that's going to about wrap us up for Heart of Ice. Vinton, remind us one more time where people can find you on the interwebs.
Yeah, so you can hear my shows, Read Brave Comics, that's a podcast, and you can find me on Twitter at Flesh Eater and talk to me about comics because that's all I do on there.
Vinton, thanks a lot for coming by.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a real pleasure having you on. In fact, we loved it so much. Me and Joshua, we've talked about it and we've thought about it. Wouldn't it be awesome if you came back for another episode?
I think it would.
Okay. Well, we're going to have you back for another episode.
Yeah, I'll do you a favor and do that.
Well, that about wraps up this animated discussion. Caleb, where can people go to continue the conversation with you?
Well, you can always find me on Twitter talking about film, television, and all manner of other sorts of pop culture goodness at C Masters Talk. On Twitter, again, that's at letter C Masters Talk. I'm also the editor-in-chief at a film website that specializes in in-depth critique and analysis of film, thecinematropolis.com. And we publish essays on all types of films, good comic book movies, all that good stuff, including some thoughts from my co-host Joshua here. And you can find all of those at thecinematropolis.com. Joshua, what about you?
I'm also most active on Twitter, where you can find me easily enough, at Joshua Unruh. I'm happy to field any superhero questions you might have, and who knows, it might even become a podcast unto itself. I'll also keep you in the loop on any fiction, articles, podcasts, or diatribes I cast out into the world, including my work at the Cinematropolis and for Pulp Diction Productions and Press.
Join us next time for Beware the Gray Ghost, where Joshua and I take a nostalgic stroll down memory lane with one of our favorites, Adam West. That's going to be episode 18 of the first season of Batman the Animated Series.
Until next time, we'll see you back here. Same bat time, same bat channel. Animated Discussion is a Pulp Diction Productions program and is 100% supported by listeners like you. To find out how you can keep this and our other shows in production, check out patreon.com/pulpdictionproductions. And if you can't support us financially, please leave us a rating and review on iTunes. It's the best way to help others discover the show. Keep up with Pulp Diction news by following at Joshua Unruh on Twitter, or find us at facebook.com/pulpdictionproductions. And a special thanks to Vinnie Hogan for our original theme music.